G'day everyone and welcome back to Showtime Footy, presented by the Big Swing Noting podcast. I didn't expect to be making this episode. I didn't expect to be recording a podcast episode, honestly, until late November when my exams had finished and all out of that, and we can just totally focus on the podcast and all that other stuff. I was planning to just take a back seat until then, ride the wave, let the footy finals happen, which sort of sucks that I would be missing out on that, but and then do a whole bunch for trade period, whole bunch for the cricket, for the summer of cricket, and the Ashes going up, and there's also a lot of world cricket I'd like to be talking about right now, but unfortunately just don't really have the time. But the Brisbane Lions, as you will see by the title, are just so interesting right now. I couldn't not make this. I have to talk about them. There's just so much on my mind about them. As you will all be well aware by now, there are reports coming out that Lachie Neale potentially might be requesting a trade back to Fremantle, which is the last thing I saw coming in any sense of the word. It hasn't been confirmed yet by the Brisbane Lions or by Neale himself yet, but the reports was by Rhino in the footy, the Western Australian 7 News reporter, Rhino, that I can't remember his name. Ryan Daniels? I don't know. Anyway, that he would be reporting that he would be considering a move back home to Western Australia, which, and maybe by the time this video's out, there's more on it. But we haven't had that confirmed just yet, but it seems pretty likely, which, I know. We'll get to that in a second. And then, of course, Saturday night's defeat to the Bulldogs in a semi-final by 1 point, meaning Chris Fagan's finals record is now 1-5, and 4 of those are at home finals, I believe, as well. What was the one that wasn't? Oh, it was last week against Melbourne. Anyway, I'm personally, I have a really strong liking towards the Lions. They're probably my second or third favorite team. And so sometimes I am a bit biased towards them, and I might be in this episode. But ultimately, my point is that I follow them pretty closely, right? I know most of the list and what they're trying to move towards. About halfway through this season, I had Brisbane as my premiership. They were the favourites in my eyes. Once I had Geelong at the very start of the season, but they were just haven't really been looking the goods all year, and I thought they were finally coming into it. But then Tom Stewart got injured a bit later in the year, and I don't think they can win the premiership without Tom Stewart. I'll probably eat my words on that, but I don't really think they will. Probably be Melbourne. But again, we'll see. This isn't about that. I had the Brisbane right at the top because they didn't have very many injuries apart from Cam Rayner, who was looking so good in the preseason. I honestly think he could have been on for an All-Australian year. I think he was gonna be the guy that would have broken the game open, and that's something that the Lions have been missing for the last couple September runs. Zach Bailey is almost there. He's still only 22 though, so he still has a bit of growth to go. But Zach Bailey is the certified match winner, and I think he's going to go into that role. But I think Hollywood, as they call Cam Rayner up in Queensland, is that I think he was going to be that guy for them this year. I think him, Bailey, McCluggage, Lyons, and Neale, that's insane. And then you got Zorko will probably be coming off the flank for most of this year. He probably doesn't make All-Australian if Cam Rayner is fit, to be honest, because I think Rayner would have gotten a lot more midfield minutes. And potentially Matt might even have meant that Lachie Neale is full fit for most of this year, and he's not rushed back into playing rather, and he can be at full fitness for the back end of this year and really hitting top form for the end of the final. So maybe this season, I think this season looks a lot different for them if Cam Rayner isn't injured. And in addition to that, Eric Hipwood's injury was absolutely massive this year. Joe Danaher, really, really good forward. He had a sensational year this year. He was the All-Australian squad of 40, I believe, and rightfully so. Kicked a goal every game. He was a consistent threat, and he was what I think is often overlooked with Joe Danaher is his ability to move up the ground and be really, really versatile. Although he sort of lumbers he's 6'7" or whatever, as a tall bloke does, he sort of lumbers over the ball, but he does move it along really well, and he does provide actually a lot of pace, which is really rare for someone that height in AFL football, and especially someone that you often label as a key forward. But he's had a really, really good debut year with the Lions, and I think that'll only go upwards as they keep constructing their forward line. But him, I don't think he can be... Well, he can be the main forward on a premiership team, but I don't think he can be the only key forward on a premiership team. And I think we're sort of in the age where that's not really a thing now. You don't really have a power forward as you used to with I was going to say Jonathan Brown, but he wasn't there and he was really young for the three peats, and they still had a crazy forward line. I would say like a Gary Ablett Senior, Tony Lockett, Tony Modra, all those guys. You guys get the point. There used to be a huge day of the power forward. I feel like those days are gone. The most recent was Buddy Franklin, but even then, he has still the premierships he had won. He really he was so benefited of his best mate Jared Ruffhead in the forward line, and that really propelled the Hawks to a couple premierships. And I feel like that could be another big reason why the Swans haven't yet won a premiership with him there, because they tried to run that with Kurt Tippett. And I think that might have been just what they were missing, is Kurt Tippett's fitness, and he was just kind of buns by the whole time he was there. But I feel like these days you need 2 or 3 medium or key forwards. And the Lions not having Eric Hipwood to just draw some gravity around from Danaher sometimes. Although, actually no, I would say that the other way around. Danaher creates a really big bit of offensive gravity. I know you're probably sick to death of me saying that from the last episode. We talked about Jamarra Ugle-Hagan. That seems so long ago. How that would really benefit the Dogs forward line, and it did for the bits he played. I don't actually know where he is now, if he's not injured or what. They're just not playing him. Yeah, but I think Joe Danaher, he draws, like you saw it last night. Joe Danaher had 2-3 men right on him, and he couldn't get himself into the game. What did I say last night? Saturday night. He couldn't get himself into the game fully because he kept getting muscled out at the contest. The only goal he kicked came from the back of the contest, and he had to rove his own ball and snap it around his body, and it was from 35 out. And if you got Eric Hipwood there, you can't. If you do throw 2 to 3 men on Joe Danaher at a contest, Eric Hipwood's just out at the 50, and he'll take that ball instead, and he'll center it back into Lincoln McCarthy, right? And then if you go 1-on-1 or each of them, or sort of float between them, Danaher will absolutely rip a 1-on-1 to pieces. And so I feel like that opens up the Brisbane forward line a ton, and I think for sure, absolutely no doubt, they would have won, or they would have been top 2 if those guys haven't been fit. Another thing I really want to quickly mention is Harris Andrews and Darcy Gardner not being 100% fit this year. I don't think I saw a single game where Harris Andrews was 100% fit. I actually think he saved probably his best game of the season until the semi-final. I thought he played really, really well. He looked like he's All-Australian himself, but he still wasn't moving right, you know? He's just hasn't been quite there. He's been maybe 5 meters apart. He's just sort of looked a bit passive this year. And that's really hurt their back line, and that's why they haven't been as quite locked down as they could have been, although Starcevic has been a revelation down there. And then another thing that I feel like it's gotten hugely, hugely overlooked is the importance of Darcy Gardner. He is so well valued within the Brisbane Lions, and it feels like no one else in the AFL community values him at all, which is just crazy to me, because he's I would liken him to Starcevic, but he's just more of a general guy. He's more body built. He's more willing to just position himself right, and he can kick it out of full back. I feel like Darcy Gardner was the most important defender to Brisbane in the last couple of years, and that's why last year they fell short, because they had to fill in Jackson Payne, who's not a bad player, Jackson Payne, but he's not Darcy Gardner, right? And all those little blocks, although they're not huge losses, because I don't feel like Brisbane really have a huge loss, but they're just a lot of key pieces that when you miss around, you need key position players in a premiership side. That's just what has to happen. And you look at Melbourne and how well they're going right now, they haven't had any key position injuries all year. I think. Anyway, but that's why they're looking so good. And so I feel like those bits and pieces, and Dan McStay, of course, has been in and out, hasn't really found his rhythm Although, to be fair, like the games he has played, he's had really, really good hands down forward, and that has allowed Joe Danaher to really shine, even with someone like Dan McStay. So, like I say, I feel like the makeups for a premiership side are still there for Brisbane, and I feel like they will definitely take the next step next year. And I feel like they will make a grand final next year before the trade period has started, before everything's transpired. Like, that's a way too early prediction and whatnot. But 1-5 in finals under Chris Fagan. Fair enough. I understand the backlash towards them and whatnot. What I was not expecting was Lachie Neale potentially requesting a trade back to Fremantle. Words cannot express that is pretty much that was what my reaction was like when I saw that. It blew my mind. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was thinking, oh, that's got to be fake, right? Because AFL reporting is really bogus. You can't get an actual reliable report these days. So we go back to Lachie Neale. If he requests a trade to Fremantle, that's got to be one of the weirds. I know he's doing it for family reasons, but it feels like such a weak move to me. And I'm sure this wouldn't have been decided just after they lost, but for it to come out just as they get knocked out of finals for the third year in a row, it's sort of like, are you really loyal to us? How are you actually going to be? And again, these reports could all be bogus. Maybe he does play at the Lions next year, and I think there's still a fair possibility he does. But let's say he does request a trade, right? Well, to be fair, he's just said to Western Australia was the initial report. And the Eagles, they can't make a trade. They just can't. And I don't think Neil would want to go to the Eagles anyway, because the Eagles are going to be a bottom four side in a few years. They've just got the only real direction they've got is Oscar Allen. He's probably their best young player. I can't even think. Jared Brander is alright. Luke Edwards is alright. I don't know. You're really clutching at straws there. I don't think that's going to keep you afloat. Their whole list is just aging, and I don't think they can completely rebuild that to making the finals in the next few years. I don't think it'll happen. And their salary cap is just it's absolutely loaded. They couldn't fit in Neil's contract at the moment. And to be frank, they just don't have the assets. Actually, no, I think that's a lie. If they were to give up maybe proper key position players, I was going to say Darling. That doesn't make sense. Actually, no. Now I'm thinking about it. No, they don't. They definitely don't have the assets. Because my problem with Lachie Neale going to Fremantle and a trade eventuating there, Fremantle don't really have anything that Brisbane would want. They're at completely different sides of the scale. Yes, Brisbane are still a young-ish team. Actually, I think they're the third or fourth youngest team in the league still, even though they've been in their top four for the last 3 years. But the difference is Fremantle are still they're in the guts of a rebuild right now. They're just in that, okay, we're still stacking up on key position players. We're trying to build up our core still. And although we're going to try and do that while still being around about the finals mark, but we're still looking to acquire assets, right, to help us contend in the future. Whereas Brisbane, they're at the top right now. They're trying to win right now. And regardless of your view of whether you think they can win right now or whether you think their finals record in the last few years means that they will win a premiership, their vision is that they have to be winning right now. They're trying to win a premiership in the next 2-3 years, right? I don't know if there's anyone on Fremantle they could really want. Matt Taberner would be the first player I would think of, right, that Brisbane would want. But is that really worth it if you're Fremantle? Sure, he's matured. I'm not... How old actually is Taberner? I feel like he would be around the 28 mark, right? But I feel like Taberner could still be there for your next premiership because he is a very, very capable forward. He was actually my pick for the Coleman Medal this year. Unfortunately, he didn't really stay fit for the whole year. Fremantle weren't quite as good as I anticipated, but he's still thereabouts. He is there he's their forward line, right? I know Tracy was there this year, and he was a revelation. Yeah, there you go. Tabernar's 28, right? And I feel like he could still. I think he probably will be there by the time Fremantle are contending again. He'll be like at his last few years of his prime, or just exiting his prime. And there is absolutely value in keeping him there. He is a key piece to a premiership side, and that is something that Brisbane would want, I feel. But I'm not sure that is worth Fremantle giving up for an in and under midfielder, right? Although it's an incredible in and under midfielder, it's a Brownlow medalist, right? There's just so many of them, you know? Sarong is a guy. Brayshaw is a guy. I can't even think who else is in their midfield. Fife is playing more forward these days. Chera, I know Chera's leaving, right? And you probably want someone to replace him. But I mean, and some people are saying we'll trade Chera for Neil. That's just not going to happen. For one, Chera requested a trade to Victoria, I'm pretty sure. For two, why would Brisbane want Chera? I don't know why Brisbane would want Chera. He just doesn't fit the timeline. Yes, he's a very good player, Adam Chera, but I feel like you're trading him more based on potential. Whoever is going to go and put together a package for Adam Chera needs to put in a serious package. And I think, he does actually kind of suit the Carlton mold and the Carlton time. Like, he's still developing. He's that sort of extra midfielder that they might need. So I can sort of see that, right? Brisbane, I just don't see. And yes, maybe by, he could... I think he will take a big jump next year, Adam Chera, right? But... Yeah. So it's just looking at Fremantle's midfield now. They need another winger, right? Mundy was really good this year, but he's only going to last for so long. I don't think he's going to be there for your next premiership, right? And then for the rest of that team, I don't know who that leaves that you can trade for him. Because your first instinct to say, based on the past of AFL trades, right, is you trade picks for your star players that are requesting trades, right? Jeremy Cameron, 3 or 4 first round picks? Something ridiculous like that, which is crazy to think about. But that sort of makes sense for Giants in a way, right? Because the Giants they're sort of in that mid range, right? Yes, they're sort of competing to make finals, but they're not really they're not premiership contenders, the Giants. And they're still a youngish side, and and you can sort of rebuild on the fly. So it makes sense why they would want draft picks. Brisbane, I don't know why they wouldn't want draft picks. If Brisbane do put out an asking price for Neil, and they say, we want 3 first-round picks, or 2 first-round picks and a future second, right? What? That's stupid. I'll be out and out and say that is stupid for Brisbane. For one, this year's draft, right, it's full of midfielders. Brisbane don't need midfielders. Even if they lose Lachie Neale, they have Devon Robertson to come into place, right? They have Cam Rayner who can come back into place next year. Zach Bailey's going to be playing more in the midfield, right? They just don't need another midfielder. They just don't need it. And you can put in, Jared Lyons can easily be your main ball winner, right? You can put in Hugh McCluggage into the middle instead of on the wing. He generally plays, I think it's about an even spread of playing actually on the wing, and then being in and under at the contest. I know he always starts on the wing, but I think it's about 50% split, right? You just don't need another on-baller, and that's all this draft is, right? Brisbane need a dash of halfback. They need like a Bailey Dale type. Bailey Dale's not going to be available to trade for. Brisbane won't be able to trade for anyone because the salary cap is maxed. And the only, I can't even think. The only player I can sort of think maybe for Brisbane would be Hayden Young. He sort of fits that mold, I guess, and would have really high value because he's so young. But I feel like Fremantle have really invested in that, and I don't think that they're going to trade away one of their young key position guys for another midfielder. I just don't, whenever there's a player that Brisbane might want, Fremantle won't want it. And whenever there's a player that Fremantle might want to rush along, right, which I don't even know who they would want to trade out, like James Aish. Why would Brisbane want James Aish back? He used to play for Brisbane. Never forget. But why would you want H? Luke Ryan? He's 25. He's going to be there for your next premiership. He's a key piece of that Freo team. Like, Rory Lobb is... Rory Lobb, Lions would want. I can understand that. Freo would be willing to trade him away. That's not enough value for Lachie Neale. And if you're just going to give up Neale for Rory Lobb, a first-round pick, and a third or a second, right? That's a crap package. For a team that's trying to contend for a premiership, you are not going to lose your Brownlow medalist for a Rory Lobb and some young guys. Like, come on. Like, I'd be really disappointed if Brisbane did that. They can do a lot in this situation if Neale does request a trade. But that, I think, is the bad option. Where Brisbane sit in the indicative draft order right now, it'll probably move down a couple after free agency and all that happens. But they're in a good position to get Darcy Wilmot in the draft. And I think he's probably a little bit shorter than they would have liked, but he has really good run and penetrating kicks outside of the backline. And more than anything, he is a commander. He is a guy that will structure the backline. He will, and even though he'll be 18, 19, he really fits the Brisbane mold, exactly what they need. And I suspect that they'll be trying to draft him, right? But they can do that where they are in the draft right now. They don't need more picks to do that. I don't really think that there's anyone else in this draft that they would really want, other than maybe Josh Gibcus. But he's, that's number 8 in the draft, which is actually where Freo are going to be. But no, but again, why would you trade Neale for Rory Lobb and Josh Gibcus? I just don't think that's worth it. I really don't think that's worth it. So, and when you both sides don't really have players that the other team wants, that's where you turn to draft picks. And that's where the Lions just don't need draft picks. Yes, they've rebuilt their team pretty much all through the draft. It's been a really, really good rebuild and really admirable one, the way that they've done it. And they've recruited guys who are just mates with each other, old country boys, right, that are gonna stick together. They have that glue in them, right? But to just go another couple years, after you've made finals, you're so close, and then you're gonna be nah, let's hit the draft this year. Really? If there was a key position guy, if it was last year's draft and you were gonna get Denver Granger Barras, Nick Cox, someone like that, in somewhere in the range of the top 10, I'd get that. That makes sense to me, in a sense, because, and last year, Tom Brown's statement here, last year is a year ago, right? Which means the list is a whole lot younger. And although I think this year they definitely should have been competing for a premiership and they could have won it, had all things gone right for them, this was, I think, the start of their premiership window. Even though they've been top 4 the last 2 years, I don't think that they were actual premiership favourites, and I don't think that they were going to do it. They absolutely overachieved in 2019, right? I suspected that they would make the 8 that year. Some people weren't expecting them to move out of the bottom 5, but they went full bang and put themselves into second place on the ladder, which is just mental. And then that year they lost to the team that eventually won the premiership, right? And then the next year they beat the team that eventually won the premiership, and then they just had a bad game. It's 2 weeks later. It just happens, and I know that you need to eliminate those bad games to win a premiership, right? But if you had have been at the draft last year, this is still a really young side, and you're going to expect those bad games. Whereas if you have a Granger Barras or a Nick Cox, they're going to be much more ready next year, and that list is going to be way although Brisbane had a few games this year, all their losses, they were not by much, right? Or I guess they had one half against Melbourne where they all fell off, and I think they were just ran over. They're just outclassed. They were on a pretty good stretch at that point, the Lions. Melbourne were up. I think they'd just come off a loss to Adelaide. So the stars sort of aligned for that one. Richmond loss, I think we all saw coming eventually. But the point is, as a young team, these bad games are going to eliminate. And I feel like the last year's loss to Geelong in the prelim final, when they had the prime opportunity to win the premiership, it was sort of inevitable for a young team. Like, you think back the last 30 years, right? I can only really think of a couple teams that won the premiership when they weren't supposed to, before their timeline, right? That was the Baby Bombers of 1993 and Hawthorn of 2008. They both teams won their premiership with a relatively young list. And although I know Hawthorn stacked up, well, they didn't stack up, but they added a couple older guys like Stewie Jew just to like actually put them level with Geelong, which was one of the greatest teams of all time at that moment. They weren't supposed to win that year, and the year after they missed finals, and their next premiership was 5 years later. Essendon's next premiership was 7 years later, and although it was a bit of a different list, they still won the premiership in 1993 way before their time, right? The Baby Bombers, they had no right to win that premiership. It was a crazy, crazy season. Like, Carlton were probably the favourites that year from memory. Like, those are the only two real teams. And there's a reason why it just doesn't happen that much. And I feel like people just need to be a bit patient with Brisbane, because they were out of the finals for 14 years, right? Or hadn't won a final for 14 years. Something like that, right? Like, last time they made finals would have been 2009, I think. Yes, that's not 14 years. 10 years. 10 years. We'll say 10 years, right? And they were bottom dwellers for a lot of that period. So, for them to suddenly take this jump as a really young team with a lot of synergy and then start criticizing them for not winning finals immediately sort of seems a bit, premature to me, right? I feel like this Brisbane team still has a lot to give. Most of these players still haven't hit their peak yet. Harris Andrews is like 23 years old, right? Zach Bailey, 22 years old. Let me just double check that. Harris Andrews, 24 years old, right? Starcevic, 22 years old, I believe, right? 22 years old. You go back into the midfield. Hugh McCluggage, 23 years old, already like a makeshift All-Australian squad member, right? He's been in the discussion every year. He could have easily started on the wing at the All-Australian team this year. They have a really, not a really young team, but the bases of their team are still young. Eric Hipwood's 23 years old, I'm pretty sure. Jared Berry, 23 years old. Devon Robertson is 21 years old, I think. Come on, show me. Show me. 20 years old. And I think he's going to be a star of the future too. And if you put him into the Lachie Neale role, he showed this year he can absolutely fly that role. He kept, like, Jared Berry was fit for a few weeks. He couldn't get into the team because Devon Robertson was just that nice, and he just kept doing that all year. And I that's why I feel like again, this team didn't have Lachie Neale for a lot of this year. They went undefeated when they didn't have Lachie Neale in the lineup this year. And I think they were 7-0 without Lachie Neale, and I think they were, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think they had one more loss than they had a win with Lachie Neale. That doesn't say that Lachie Neale negatively impacts your team, because he doesn't. He's a Brownlow winner. He just doesn't. And like I feel like a lot of people just don't appreciate the way Lachie Neale plays. He's like, if you go to the Gabba and you actually see a game of Lachie Neale play, right? His running patterns and the way he constantly attacks the contest is so valuable, because not only does he instantly win the ball each time, which is valuable in itself, sort of a bit overrated, but I feel like more people are getting onto that with the whole Tom Mitchell dead stats thing. You still need to get first hands to the contest, right? That does set up the play. But he runs in lines that actually set up the play. They put in 2 steps ahead of the play. He is a really, really valuable, high effort, high work player, because he's a lot like Tuke Miller actually in terms of running sense. He'll do a kick off to the wing or 70 meters out from half forward. He'll sprint into the clear space and make it up for the next kick. And then he'll go back to, and then he'll kick it to full forward, right? Excuse me. And that's something that's really, really valuable. That's what the best players do. That's what the best midfielders do. And I was going to say something about Zach Tui there for some reason, but that's a topic for another time. Anyway, I'm really unsure of what a Lachie Neale trade would look like. Check Twitter again right now, but I don't think that there's been any new news. Any new news? That's just repeating myself there. I don't think that Lachie Neale can go to West Coast. I just don't think it's possible for him to go to West Coast. It just doesn't, just logistically doesn't make sense. And for a Fremantle Lachie Neale trade, Fremantle would be asking for a lot. Brisbane will be asking for a lot. Because he's still under contract for 2 years. Lachie Neale still tried to play through injury for the games that he played this year. For the 8 or 9 games that he played this year. All of them were played right through injury. Which I think still shows his dedication to the club. And I feel like if you keep him on that team, he's not a guy that's just going to sit out, right? I mean, you don't really get that much in AFL where someone just flat out refuses to play. Mostly because it's like, why? Like, you can't, there's no mid-season trades in AFL, so there's not really much point in doing that. But they've still got 2 years left on his contract. They're going to be competing for a premiership again next year. I think he'll probably stay at the Lions this year. Even if he requests a trade, I don't think Fremantle has the assets. Or they do have the assets, but they don't have the appropriate assets, if that makes sense. Yeah, I just don't think that they have the appropriate assets. But, they still have something to give, but if a team is going to lose out on this trade, if a trade does happen to take place, one team is going to be a much bigger loser than the other. And I think more than likely, that team is going to be Brisbane. Because if you are going to get back someone like Rory Lobb, who's a good player, he fits a premiership team, he fits the Lions team especially, that's all well and good. But Lachie Neale's a Brownlow medalist. And you can argue how valuable a Brownlow actually is in today's game. You can argue how valuable in and under on ballers are in today's game. You can argue how much of an impact Lachie Neale actually has. But the fact of the matter is, he is a centerpiece in any midfield. If you put him in any team, I would say across the league, he's the number one on baller. Or the number one ball winner, So I don't think it makes sense to just get one thing back and then draft capital in return. If you want draft capital as a third layer, or just something to make the trade match, I can get that. If you got this won't happen, but if you say Lachie Neale for Adam Chera, a second round pick, and then you give back a third round pick or a 2/3 and a second. You know how AFL trades work. They're really weird. I really wish that the AFL trade system was just a lot more different, where teams would just go after players that they might just need. And I feel like Essendon sometimes do that, but they're just kind of crazy with it, and I don't know, it's just sort of a bit of a turn-off. I don't know why. Probably just because it's Essendon. But, they did last year with Josh Dunkley. There was absolutely nothing, no rumours considering that Josh Dunkley was unhappy with the Bulldogs. And then they just said, yeah, we'd like Josh Dunkley. And then he suddenly requested a trade. Bulldogs are smart enough just to not do the trade. And maybe that'll be the same with Lachie Neale. Because ultimately, I feel like although Lachie Neale obviously values his wife, his family, and all that in Western Australia, I feel like he's content at the Lions. from what I've seen, he's quite happy there. And I know it's easy for me to say as an outsider, just someone of the public, like who doesn't know Lachie Neale at all and will probably never speak to him. It's easy for me to say that. But I feel like the Brisbane synergy is just always there with whoever they've really had on the team in the last few years. Like, you can see how much emotion that has brought on Saturday. Reece Madison was in tears and he wasn't even playing. Cam Rayner was right by him, had to console him. He hasn't played a game all year. It shows how much unity is in that group. And if Lachie Neale were to request a trade, I feel like he wouldn't be too bothered if Brisbane didn't actually complete the trade. And I think, overall, now that I've said all this, I think the most likely outcome, if Neale does request a trade, is that he stays for one more year. Because they can always trade him before he goes into free agency, unrestricted free agency, in 2 years. They've got him contracted for 2 more seasons. They can play him at a All-Australian level this year. He's a 2-time All-Australian Blazer winner. 1-time Brownlee medalist. He undoubtedly makes your team better. Right? And if I want to just, because anything is worth it if you win a premiership. If you do end up losing Neale in 2 years' time, but you win a premiership next year with him there, that's worth it. Any premiership is worth it. And like I was saying earlier that I don't like what the Eagles are doing right now. Ultimately, that just stems from them they went all out for the premiership in 2018. It worked. They got their flag. Now they're at the bottom. Hawthorn won 4 premierships in 7 years. Five grand finals in 7 years. Now they're at the bottom. Just how it works. And there is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with bottoming out after winning a premiership. And Brisbane is a rare case because they can win a premiership now and still keep building for the future. Because all their team's young, and it seems like Brisbane is actually becoming a bit of a destination place now. If Lachie Neale were to move, although I don't think it would necessarily impact the team hugely because they've played so much of the season without Neale this year, and they looked great, and they've got plenty of players to cover him, it would be a big loss for Queensland footy. Because here's a player that willingly came back to Queensland. Came over to Queensland with years left in his contract, away from home, because he wanted to be there. And you can argue if that was for money's sake or whatnot. But he still did it. That's huge for Brisbane footy. It's huge for footy on the coast, right? And you can see that it's starting to happen again with Gold Coast. And those two teams, their biggest struggle has been recruiting. Like, they recruit heaps and heaps of talent, which is all well and good, but then they all get homesick and they don't want to play in Queensland. Both of the teams at the moment have recruited a lot of good people as well as good players that want to be there. Will Powell bleeds red and gold for Gold Coast. So does Tuke Miller. They're both not from Queensland. Doesn't matter. And like Cam Rayner instantly was picked at pick 1, signed a 2-year extension onto his rookie contract. Is Charlie Cameron from Queensland? I think Charlie Cameron is from Queensland. But the enticement of that brings in more players. And if you're competing at the top and no one wants to leave, then if you're a budding free agent like Daniel Talia, Brisbane's an option. And just for the record, I don't think Daniel Talia will actually go there. I'll save that for an off-season preview. But Brisbane's just a really, really interesting team right now. Anyway, well played to the Bulldogs, who are through to the prelim final for the first time since 2016. Only a handful of times they've done that this century. It's a pity that they're going to lose to the Power. Yeah. Who are going to be eventual runners up to Melbourne. Who are going to beat the Cats by 10 goals. But such is life. God, I guarantee none of those things happen. I guarantee it now. Oh, anyway. Been a lot of fun being back. I'll be back in a couple months' time. Unless something huge happens or more things come out on this deal thing and I find something else I want to talk about, or I want to just do stuff about the draft. Because I've been following along the draft this year as a Hawthorn fan. And I think I've been fairly into it, right? So I'm really keen to talk about the draft and a bit of an off-season preview when it gets to that point. So stick around for that. I'll also hopefully be taking a look at the T20 World Cup, which is it's right when exam starts, actually. But yeah, well, I'll be back for the T20 World Cup, AFL trade period, all that stuff in a couple months' time. So stay on board for that because it's going to be so exciting. Cannot wait for all that to transpire. But other than that, thank you all so much for sticking with me to it's probably like a 40-minute long video now, which is a bit insane. Thanks for listening to me just on my bucket throne again, talk about absolute nonsense. Thank you to nothing. Can I cut that out? No, I'm not going to cut that out. See ya.